She was his wife, and yet she stood completely alone. The wedding breakfast had been arranged to perfection in the great hall of Thornwood, crystal glasses catching the pale autumn light, silverware polished until it shone, flowers cascading from every stone archway. But all Evangeline could feel was the cold space beside her where her husband should have been. Lord Cassian Blackwood, the Duke of Thornwood, had not looked at her once. Not during the ceremony when she had whispered her vows with trembling hope, not when the priest had pronounced them man and wife, not even when the guests had raised their glasses in a toast that felt more like mourning. He stood across the hall now, his broad shoulders turned deliberately away, speaking in low tones to his steward as if this day were nothing more than a business transaction he needed to conclude before moving on to matters of actual importance. Evangeline's fingers curled around the stem of her glass, her knuckles whitening against the crystal. She had worn her mother's pearls, had allowed her sister to weave forget-me-nots through her dark hair, had practiced a smile that she hoped would seem warm and unafraid. It did not matter. To the Duke of Thornwood, she was invisible. A few guests glanced her way, their whispers barely hidden behind gloved hands. There was pity in their eyes and something worse, amusement. The new Duchess, abandoned on her wedding day. The forgotten bride standing alone while her husband discussed estate accounts. Evangeline Ashford had been raised to endure. She lifted her chin, forced her lips to curve into a gentle smile, and greeted the next well-wisher as if her heart was not quietly splintering inside her chest. She had known this marriage was not born of affection. She had accepted that. But somewhere in the secret corners of her hopeful heart, she had believed that kindness might grow, that if she tried hard enough, if she was patient enough, he might one day look at her and truly see her. The day passed in a blur of polite conversation and hidden anguish. When evening fell and the last carriage rolled away down the gravel drive, Evangeline was led by a silent maid to the Duchess's chambers, a vast, beautifully appointed room that felt colder than any place she had ever slept. She sat on the edge of the great canopied bed, still in her wedding gown, and waited. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the door opened and Cassian entered. He was tall and severe, his dark hair swept back from a face carved by some ancient sorrow, his gray eyes as unreadable as storm clouds. He did not approach her. He simply stood near the doorway, as if entering further would be an inconvenience. "You should understand something clearly," he said, his voice low and without warmth. "This marriage is an arrangement, nothing more. I required a wife to satisfy the terms of my late uncle's will and secure my inheritance. You required financial rescue. The transaction is complete." Evangeline's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I had hoped we might at least be friends." "Friends," he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "There is no need for friendship. You will have every comfort, every luxury. You will be treated with public courtesy, but do not expect affection, do not expect warmth, and do not expect me to share this room." He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him with a finality that echoed through the silence. Evangeline sat motionless for a long time. Then very slowly she removed the forget-me-nots from her hair, one by one, and laid them on the pillow beside her. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry on her wedding day. But her heart, already fragile with hope, quietly began to learn a new lesson. This was not a marriage. This was a cage. The first month at Thornwood Hall passed in a haze of careful isolation. Cassian was rarely present. When he was, he treated Evangeline with distant politeness, the kind one might offer a stranger at a public gathering. He inquired after her comfort, ensured the kitchens were well stocked, and then retreated to his study or rode out across the moors, leaving her alone in the echoing halls. Evangeline explored the estate with quiet determination. Thornwood was beautiful in a wild, melancholy way, the vast gardens overgrown, the tenant cottages in need of repair, the the servants loyal but uncertain of their new mistress. She discovered that the previous Duchess, Cassion's mother, had died many years ago, and the hall had been without a lady ever since. There was a sadness here, a heaviness that clung to the stone walls like mist. And slowly, without intending to, Evangeline began to fill the silence. She started with small things, flowers arranged in the great hall, worn curtains mended, a letter written to a local orphanage offering support. When she learned that one of the tenant families had lost their roof in a storm, she quietly arranged for repairs, paying from the household allowance Cassion had granted her without a second thought. She did not do it for his approval. She did it because the ache of being unwanted was too heavy to carry without purpose. If she could not be loved, she would at least be useful. The servants began to warm to her. Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper who had served the family for 30 years, started leaving small bouquets in Evangeline's sitting room. The groundskeeper's daughter, a shy girl of 12, began following her through the gardens, chattering about birds and wildflowers. And yet Cassion remained utterly oblivious. One evening, Evangeline stood at the window of her chamber, watching the sun sink behind the moors in shades of amber and rose. She had not spoken to her husband in 4 days. He had taken his meals in his study, had ridden out early and returned late, had not once inquired where she was or what she did. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and whispered to the empty room, "I am trying to be patient. I am trying to be strong, but I am so tired of being nothing." The silence offered no comfort. Then, unexpectedly, a crack of light appeared. It was a damp November afternoon when Cassion returned early from a journey to York. Evangeline was in the library, a heavy leather-bound book open on her lap, when she heard his footsteps pause in the doorway. She looked up startled. He rarely sought her out. "The roof at the miller's cottage," he said, his tone unreadable. "You arranged for it to be repaired." It was not a question, but she nodded. The family had no other recourse. The winter would have been brutal. His gray eyes studied her for a long moment. Something flickered there, surprise, perhaps, or a reluctant curiosity. "I was not aware you concerned yourself with such matters." "I concern myself with whatever I can," she replied quietly. "It passes the time." A muscle in his jaw tightened. He stepped forward. Just one step, as if drawn against his will. "You have made changes throughout the hall. The servants speak well of you. Does that displease you?" "It confuses me," he admitted, and for the first time his voice held something other than coldness. A crack in the armor, small but visible. "I expected you to demand gowns and jewels and trips to London. I expected complaints and tears and resentment." Evangeline closed the book gently. "You expected me to be someone else." He said nothing, but his silence was an answer. For a brief, fragile moment, the distance between them seemed to narrow. She could almost feel the shape of a conversation waiting to be born, an understanding that hovered just out of reach. Then his expression shuddered, the walls rising once more. "Dinner will be served at 8. Do not wait for me." He was gone before she could respond. But that night, for the first time, he did not take his meal alone in his study. He sat at the far end of the long dining table, and though they barely spoke, the simple act of sharing the same room felt like a victory. Evangeline allowed herself a sliver of hope. It was a mistake. 3 weeks later, everything shattered. The Duke of Thornwood hosted a dinner party for several neighboring families, an obligation he could not avoid. Evangeline dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. She had learned the names and interests of every guest, had planned conversation topics, had instructed the kitchen on their favorite dishes. She wanted, desperately, to be a credit to him. And for the first hour it seemed to work. Lady Atherton complimented the flower arrangements. Sir William praised the wine selection. Cassion stood at the head of the table, and though his smile was thin, it was present. Then Lady Cordelia Montfort arrived late. She was everything Evangeline was not: tall, golden-haired, exquisitely confident. Her gown was the color of champagne, her laugh like silver bells, and when she swept into the room, Cassian's entire demeanor changed. He crossed to her immediately, took her gloved hand, and bent over it with a reverence that Evangeline had never seen in him. His cold eyes warmed, his rigid posture softened. "Cordelia," he murmured, "you came. Did you think I would miss an opportunity to see you, Cassian?" Her gaze drifted past him, landing on Evangeline with a flicker of condescending amusement. "And this must be your new Duchess. How charming." Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face. She did not need to be told. She could see it in every glance, every whispered word, the way the other guests exchanged knowing looks. Lady Cordelia Montfort was the woman Cassian had wanted, the woman he still wanted. And Evangeline was merely the one he had been forced to marry. The dinner became a torment. Cordelia monopolized Cassian's attention, her hand resting on his sleeve, her laughter filling the spaces where Evangeline sat in growing silence. The guests followed Cordelia's lead, their polite interest in the new Duchess evaporating as they gravitated toward the obvious center of power. Evangeline spent the final hour of the evening holding a cup of tea she did not drink, her smile fixed in place, her heart crumbling to dust. When the last carriage departed, she turned to climb the stairs without a word. "Evangeline." Cassian's voice stopped her. She paused on the third step, her back to him. "Lady Cordelia is an old friend," he said, as if that explained everything. "There is history there. I would not expect you to understand." She turned slowly. Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she felt. "You are correct. I do not understand. I do not understand why you married me if your heart belongs to another. I do not understand why you could not at least offer me the dignity of honesty." His expression hardened. "I offered you a title, a home, security for your family. I never promised you my heart." "No," she whispered, "you did not." She continued up the stairs, her hand gripping the banister so tightly that her fingers ached. Behind her, she heard him exhale slowly, as if he might call her back. He did not. That night, Evangeline made a decision. She would stop waiting. She would stop hopping for his glances, his scraps of attention, his rare moments of almost warmth. She would stop twisting herself into shapes she thought might please him. She would stop being a ghost haunting the edges of his life. If she was to live in a cage, she would build a garden inside it. The next morning she rose early. She requested a meeting with Mr. Anders, the estate steward, and reviewed every account, every ledger, every neglected corner of Thornwood's operations. She visited the tenants' cottages herself, listening to their concerns with genuine attention. She established a small school for the workers' children in an unused wing of the hall. She wrote letters to charitable societies and horticultural experts, planning a restoration of the overgrown glasshouse. And she did it all without once seeking Cassian's approval. At first, he did not seem to notice. He was away again, this time in London for 2 weeks, and the silence of his absence felt almost peaceful. Evangeline filled her days with purpose, and slowly, the hollow ache in her chest began to ease. Not because she had stopped caring, but because she had finally accepted that his indifference was not a reflection of her worth. She began to laugh again, quietly, with Mrs. Hartley over tea, with the gardener's daughter as they planted winter roses. She began to wear colors that brought her joy rather than the muted shades she had thought befitting a dutiful duchess. She began to sing softly to herself as she walked the corridors, old songs her mother had taught her before the debts and the sorrow had stolen their melody away. The transformation was subtle, but it was real. And then one December afternoon, Cassian returned. He found her in the glasshouse, sleeves rolled up, dirt smudged across her cheek, laughing at something the head gardener had said about particularly stubborn roses. She did not hear him approach. She only became aware of his presence when the gardener's expression shifted and he bowed quickly, murmuring, "Your Grace." Evangeline turned. Cassian stood in the doorway, his riding coat still dusted from the road, his dark hair windswept, his expression utterly unreadable. But something in his gray eyes was different. There was a sharpness there, an attention that had never been directed at her before. "You have been busy," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron, unflustered. "Idle hands are a luxury I cannot afford. You have changed the entire East Wing into a schoolroom. You have redirected funds to repair the mill. You have invited the vicar's wife to organize a parish relief society. Is that disapproval I hear?" "It is confusion," he said, taking a step closer. "Again, I thought I understood you. I thought you would be content with comfort and quiet, but you are not the woman I believed I married." Evangeline met his gaze steadily. "No, I am not. But then, you never truly looked at me long enough to know." The words hung in the air between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then something flickered in Cassian's expression, something almost like regret, before he turned sharply and strode back toward the hall. Evangeline watched him go, and for the first time she felt no urge to follow. Winter deepened, and a new pattern emerged. Cassian began to appear more frequently. He would find reasons to be in the rooms where she worked, consulting estate documents in the library while she read to the children, inspecting the glasshouse repairs while she pruned the roses. He rarely spoke, but his presence was constant, a silent shadow at the edges of her life. And there were moments, fleeting and strange, when she would look up to find him watching her with an expression she could not name. Once she caught him standing in the doorway of the schoolroom, listening as she taught a group of small children their letters. His face was softer than she had ever seen it, the hard lines of his jaw gentled by something that might have been wonder. But whenever she met his eyes, he would look away, the walls slamming back into place. She did not chase him. She had learned her lesson. Instead, she continued building her garden. The arrival of Mr. Thomas Hayworth changed everything. He came in February, on a day when the moors were shrouded in silver mist. Thomas was the son of a wealthy merchant family who had been neighbors to the Ashfords in gentler times. He was kind, cheerful, and had known Evangeline since she was a girl in braids and muddy pinafores. When he stepped down from his carriage and saw her waiting on the steps, his face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "Little Eva," he said warmly, taking her hands. "Look at you, a duchess now. I always knew you would rise." "Thomas," she laughed, a sound that felt rusted from disuse, "you came all this way." "I had business in York and could not pass so close without seeing an old friend." His gaze swept over her and something softened in his expression. "You look well, but there are shadows in your eyes. Are you happy here?" It was such a simple question, asked with such sincere concern, that Evangeline felt tears prick behind her lashes. She blinked them away quickly. "I am content. I keep myself busy." Thomas did not look convinced, but he was too much a gentleman to press. Instead, he offered his arm. "Show me this grand estate of yours. I hear you have transformed it." They spent the afternoon walking the grounds, talking of old times and new hopes. Thomas's presence was like sunshine after a long winter, warm, uncomplicated, and deeply familiar. He made her laugh until her sides ached. He reminded her of who she had been before loneliness had reshaped her. And Cassian, watching from the window of his study, saw it all. He saw Evangeline's hand resting easily on another man's arm. He saw her head tilt back in laughter, her whole face alight with a joy she had never once shown in his presence. He saw the easy affection between them, the unguarded warmth. Something dark and sharp twisted in his chest, an emotion he did not recognize, or perhaps one he had refused to name. He turned from the window, his jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. That evening when Thomas joined them for dinner, Cassian was colder than Evangeline had ever seen him. His answers were clipped, his gaze hostile, his entire demeanor radiating barely restrained fury. Thomas, to his credit, remained cordial, but the tension was unbearable. When the meal ended, Cassian excused himself without a word. Evangeline found him in the library an hour later, a glass of brandy untouched beside him, staring into the fire. "You were unkind tonight," she said quietly from the doorway. "Thomas is an old friend. He deserved better courtesy." Cassian did not turn, an old friend who looks at you with far more than friendship in his eyes. The accusation stole her breath. "That is absurd." "Is it?" He rose, turning to face her, and the raw emotion in his expression was startling. "You were radiant this afternoon. I have never seen you so alive. And yet with me you are always careful, always guarded. Tell me, Evangeline, does he give you what I cannot?" "He gives me kindness without condition," she replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "He does not look through me as if I am invisible. He does not make me feel like a burden to be endured. So yes, perhaps I was radiant. Perhaps I was alive. Because for the first time in months, someone actually saw me." The word struck him like a physical blow. He flinched, and for just a moment the mask cracked completely. "I see you," he said hoarsely. "I see you more than you know." "Then why," she whispered, "do you keep me at such a distance?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and the silence that followed was filled with 1,000 unspoken things. Then he turned away, and the moment shattered. The days after Thomas's departure were strained and silent. Cassian retreated once more, but this time it was different. He did not ride out across the moors or lock himself in his study. Instead, he lingered in the rooms she frequented, his eyes following her with a desperate, almost haunted intensity. He would start conversations and then abandon them, leaving sentences hanging unfinished. He would stand too close, his hand almost reaching for hers, before pulling back at the last moment. Evangeline did not understand him. She had stopped trying. But then, one cold evening in early March, she stumbled upon a secret that changed everything. She was searching the attic for old ledgers when she found a wooden chest tucked behind a stack of trunks. It was carved with initials, CB and S, A, and bound with a faded ribbon. Curiosity overcoming caution, she lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied in bundles, all addressed in a flowing feminine hand to Cassian. And beneath the letters, a miniature portrait of a woman with golden hair and a knowing smile. Lady Seraphina Ashford, Evangeline's older half-sister. The world tilted on its axis. She read the letters with trembling hands, piecing together a story she had never known. Seraphina, beautiful and reckless, had captured Cassian's heart years ago, before he inherited the dukedom. He had loved her passionately, had planned to marry her, had believed she loved him in return. But Seraphina had been ambitious. When a wealthier, higher-ranked earl had proposed, she had abandoned Cassian without a backward glance. She had written him a final letter, cruel, dismissive, laughing at his devotion, and then departed for a glamorous life in London, leaving him shattered. The initials on the chest, the bitterness in his eyes, the way he had looked at Evangeline on their wedding day as if she were a ghost he could not escape. She was not just a stranger to him. She was her sister's shadow. All this time, he had been punishing her for a betrayal she had not committed. All this time, he had looked at her and seen the woman who had broken his heart. Evangeline closed the chest and sat in the dusty silence of the attic, her mind reeling. She did not cry. She had long since run out of tears for this marriage. But something inside her shifted, a final, quiet acceptance. She understood now. And understanding, however painful, brought a strange kind of peace. She did not confront him with what she had found. Instead, she grew even more distant, but not with anger, with a gentle, resigned finality, as if she had closed a door and turned the key. She was still courteous, still diligent in her duties, but the small hopes she had once nurtured were gone. Cashin noticed immediately. The absence of her attention was louder than any argument. She no longer looked up when he entered a room. She no longer smiled when their paths crossed. She was polite, perfectly polite, and utterly unreachable. It drove him to the edge of madness. One night he came to her sitting room unannounced. She was reading by the fire, a woolen shawl draped over her shoulders, her dark hair loose and unadorned. She looked up calmly, and her expression did not change when she saw him. "Your Grace," she said, "is something the matter?" The formality cut him like a blade. "Evangeline," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "Please talk to me. Yell at me, accuse me, anything but this silence." She set her book aside and considered him with clear, steady eyes. "What would you have me say? I have spent a year trying to reach you. I have offered warmth and received coldness. I have offered loyalty and received indifference. I have tried to understand you, and now I finally do. You loved my sister. She broke your heart. And you married me, her plain younger sister, as a punishment, or perhaps as a shield so you would never have to risk your heart again." He went pale. "How do you?" "I found the letters in the attic, the chest with your initials and hers." She rose from her chair, and there was no anger in her voice, only a profound, aching weariness. "I am not Serafina. I have never been Serafina, but you have never seen me as anything but her shadow." He stepped forward, his composure crumbling. "You are wrong. At first, perhaps, I was a fool. I carried old wounds and let them blind me. But these past months, watching you, watching your strength, your kindness, the way you have rebuilt this estate and won the hearts of everyone who meets you, I have seen you, the real you, and I have been terrified." "Terrified of what?" "Of losing you." The words tore from him, raw and desperate. "Of being unworthy of you, of the truth I have been too cowardly to admit." Evangeline's breath caught. What truth? He crossed the remaining distance between them and took her hands, his grip urgent but gentle. His gray eyes, so often unreadable, were bright with anguish. "I love you, Evangeline. I have loved you for longer than I can bear to remember. I loved you when I watched you teach those children their letters. I loved you when you rebuilt that cottage roof without seeking praise. I loved you when you danced with that merchant's son, and I felt jealousy so fierce I could barely breathe. I loved you when you stopped looking at me, because that was when I realized I had destroyed the only good thing I ever had." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Evangeline stared at him, her heart pounding, 1,000 broken pieces slowly knitting back together. "You never spoke. You never once gave me a sign." "Because I did not believe I deserved you, because I was afraid." He lifted her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his breath warm and unsteady. "I built walls to protect myself, and I did not realize until too late that I had locked you out as well. I have been a fool and a coward, and I have hurt you in ways I can never undo. But if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, if you can give me one more chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you." The tears she had held back for so long finally spilled over, but they were not tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of release, of relief, of a hope she had thought long dead. "I loved you from the beginning," she whispered. "I agreed to this marriage not for the money, not for the title, but because I had seen you once years ago at a ball in London. You were kind to a servant boy who had dropped a tray. You did not know anyone was watching, but I saw and I thought, there is a man worth loving." Cashin's face crumpled with emotion. "You never told me. You never gave me the chance." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She felt his heart hammering against hers, felt the tremors running through his body, and she buried her face against his chest and let herself be held. "I will give you every chance," he murmured into her hair. "Every day for the rest of my life. I will never let you feel invisible again." Spring came to Thornwood with a gentle, golden warmth. The glass house bloomed with roses. The schoolroom echoed with laughter, and the halls that had once felt so cold now glowed with something that felt almost like home. Cassian kept his promise. He walked with Evangeline through the gardens every evening, their fingers laced together. He joined her in the schoolroom, reading stories to the children with a patience that made her heart ache. He spoke openly now, of his past, of his regrets, of his fears, and he listened, truly listened, when she shared her own. There were still difficult days, moments when old shadows flickered, but they faced them together. And slowly, the wounds began to heal. One June morning, Evangeline stood on the steps of Thornwood Hall and watched the sun rise over the moors, painting the world in shades of rose and gold. Cassian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. She leaned back into his embrace, her heart full to overflowing. "I am thinking that I stopped being your Duchess a long time ago, but I have become something else entirely." "And what is that?" She turned in his arms, smiling up at him with all the love she had once hidden away. "Yours, entirely yours." He kissed her then, with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and futures yet to come. And in the warm light of a new day, the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood began the life they had both almost lost. A life not defined by duty, or arrangement, or old wounds, but by love, patient, hard-won, and absolutely unshakable.